A jealous millionaire boss finally realized his mistake when he almost lost her. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to the main character. Every morning, at exactly 8:45, she stepped through the glass doors of the building with the same quiet routine. Head slightly lowered, shoulders squared, coffee held carefully in both hands so it would not spill on the one blazer she owned that still looked professional. Her name was Emily Carter, and she worked as an executive assistant on the 32nd floor of one of the most powerful investment firms in the city. The office was spotless. Marble floors, cold lighting, walls of glass that made the entire floor feel like it was always being watched. And at the center of it all sat Daniel Hawthorne, the millionaire boss everyone feared and admired in equal measure. Daniel Hawthorne was not loud. He did not shout. He did not need to. His disappointment carried more weight than anger ever could. A raised eyebrow, a pause before speaking, a calm voice that made people feel small without him ever raising it. And Emily felt that weight every single day. "Miss Carter," he said one morning, without looking up from his tablet, "this report is not what I asked for." She swallowed. "I followed the outline you sent last night, sir." He finally looked at her then, slowly, coldly. His eyes moved from her face to the papers in her hands, then back again. "Excuses do not belong in this office," he replied. "Fix it, or find somewhere else to work." The room went quiet. A few heads turned. No one said a word. Emily nodded once. "Yes, sir." She walked back to her desk with her face burning, hands shaking just enough that she had to grip the edge of the table to steady herself. This was not the first time, and it would not be the last. What no one in that office knew was that Emily could not afford to lose this job, not even for a single week. Her rent was overdue. Her younger brother's medical bills sat unopened on her kitchen table because she was afraid to look at the final number. This job was not a stepping stone for her. It was survival. Daniel, meanwhile, told himself a different story. He believed people showed their true colors under pressure, that loyalty, patience, and integrity only revealed themselves when comfort was stripped away. And somewhere along the line, he convinced himself that pushing Emily, humiliating her, testing her limits, was simply part of that philosophy. He told himself it was business. But what he did not see was the way Emily stayed late every night, redoing work no one would ever praise her for. The way she apologized, even when she had done nothing wrong. The way she flinched, just slightly, whenever his footsteps stopped behind her desk. And on one quiet evening, long after most of the office had emptied, Emily packed her bag, shut down her computer, and whispered something to herself that Daniel did not hear. "I cannot do this forever." That night, as the city lights flickered outside the windows of the 32nd floor, a decision began to form. One that would eventually place Daniel Hawthorne face to face with the consequences of his own cruelty. And he had no idea that he was already running out of time. The next few days passed in a quiet, suffocating rhythm. Emily arrived early, left late, and spoke only when spoken to. She learned to anticipate Daniel Hawthorne's needs before he voiced them. The moment his office door opened, she was already standing. The moment he paused mid-sentence, she was already taking notes. From the outside, she looked like the perfect assistant. Inside, she was exhausted. Daniel noticed everything. He always had. The slight delay in her responses, the dark circles beneath her eyes, the way her shoulders stiffened whenever he addressed her in front of others. And yet, instead of stopping, he pressed harder. Not because he enjoyed it. That was the lie he told himself. He believed pressure revealed character. He believed comfort bred weakness. He believed that if Emily stayed, if she endured, then she was different from the others. Different from the people who smiled at him because of his wealth, his influence, his last name. So he tested her. He reassigned work minutes before deadlines. He questioned her decisions in meetings he knew she was unprepared for. He corrected her publicly, even when the mistake was not hers. And every time she nodded and said, "Yes, sir," a strange mix of satisfaction and irritation settled in his chest. Why did she not push back? One evening, close to 10, Daniel stepped out of his office and found Emily still at her desk. The office was nearly empty, lights dimmed automatically after hours. She was staring at her screen, eyes unfocused, hands resting motionless on the keyboard. "You should go home," he said. She looked up, startled, as if she had forgotten where she was. I just need to finish this, she replied quietly. He watched her for a moment longer than necessary. There was something fragile about her then, something real. And for reasons he did not fully understand, it unsettled him. Do not make a habit of staying this late, he added, his voice returning to its usual distance. Yes, sir. At home that night, Emily sat alone at her small kitchen table. The apartment was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. She opened her laptop and checked her bank account. The numbers barely changed. Rent, utilities, medical bills, survival did not leave room for pride. She closed the laptop and leaned back in her chair, staring at the ceiling. At the same time, in a penthouse overlooking the city, Daniel poured himself a drink he did not finish. His apartment was immaculate, impersonal, untouched by warmth. He stood by the window, replaying moments he told himself were meaningless. Her silence, her composure, her refusal to complain. For the first time, a question crept into his thoughts. What if she was not staying because she wanted to impress him? What if she was staying because she had no choice? The thought irritated him. He dismissed it quickly. People always had choices. They simply chose what benefited them most. And yet, the next morning, when Emily arrived with the same careful steps and polite greeting, Daniel found himself watching her a second too long. Then, something shifted. A few days later, during lunch, Emily stepped out of the building alone. She did not notice Daniel standing near the lobby windows as she crossed the street. She did not see him pause mid-conversation when she stopped in front of a small cafe across the road. Inside, a man stood up when he saw her, not hurried, not impressed, just warm. They talked, they laughed softly, and for the first time since Daniel had known her, Emily smiled without restraint. Daniel felt something tighten in his chest. He told himself it was curiosity, nothing more. But as he watched her through the glass, leaning forward, relaxed, alive in a way she never was in his presence, an unfamiliar emotion began to surface, and it was not indifference. Daniel told himself it meant nothing. That was what he repeated the rest of the day, in meetings, in emails, in the quiet pauses between decisions that moved millions of dollars without hesitation. Emily's smile at the cafe was filed away in his mind under irrelevant details. A coincidence, a lunch break, a life that had nothing to do with him. And yet, he found himself distracted. He called Emily into his office twice that afternoon for questions he already knew the answers to. He listened more closely than usual to the sound of her voice. He noticed how carefully she chose her words, how she stood with her hands folded, waiting for dismissal like she always did. You may go, he said at last. She nodded. Thank you, sir. As she turned to leave, he almost said something else. Almost asked where she had gone for lunch. Almost asked who she had been with. He said nothing. That night, Emily did not go straight home. She walked 2 extra blocks to the bus stop near the cafe. The same man was there, leaning against the railing, jacket thrown casually over his shoulder. His name was Mark. He worked nearby. No titles, no power, just conversation that did not feel like a test. You look tired, he said gently. She smiled, smaller this time. I am. They talked about simple things, weather, traffic, the way the city felt heavier some days. Mark did not interrupt. He did not correct her. He did not look at his phone while she spoke. When the bus arrived, Emily realized something she had not felt in weeks: relief. The next morning, Daniel noticed the change before he could stop himself. Emily still arrived early, still worked efficiently, but there was something else now, a steadiness, a quiet resolve that did not come from fear. When he corrected her in a meeting, she accepted it calmly, without flinching. It unsettled him. He escalated. He assigned her an impossible schedule for an upcoming investor presentation. He expected resistance, or at least exhaustion. Instead, she nodded once and said, I will handle it. She did, flawlessly. The presentation succeeded. Applause followed. Compliments filled the room. Daniel watched as others praised her work, something he had never done publicly himself. And for the first time, he felt something sharp twist inside his chest. That evening, he stayed later than usual. As he stepped out of his office, he saw Emily near the elevators. Mark stood with her again, this time, closer, familiar, comfortable. Daniel slowed his steps without realizing it. Mark said something that made Emily laugh, not the polite smile she wore at work, a real one, unguarded. She leaned forward slightly, as if she trusted the space between them. Then it happened. Mark brushed a strand of hair from her face. She did not pull away. Instead, she looked up at him, hesitated for half a second, and kissed him. It was brief, soft, unremarkable to anyone else. To Daniel, it felt like a blow. He stopped walking. The world around him seemed to dull, as if sound had been turned down. He watched her pull back, smile again, and step into the elevator without ever noticing him standing there. Something inside Daniel cracked. Not anger, not rage, jealousy. He did not recognize it at first. He had never needed to. People did not leave him. They did not move on without his permission. And yet, as the elevator doors closed, one thought rose above all others. She was slipping beyond his control. Back in his office, Daniel stood alone, hands braced against the desk. He replayed every interaction, every moment he had dismissed her dignity as resilience. Every time he had told himself it was business. For the first time, the truth surfaced clearly and without mercy. He had not been testing her character. He had been abusing his power. And now, because of it, he was losing her. Daniel did not sleep that night. The city outside his penthouse windows glowed as it always had, indifferent and distant. He stood there for hours, replaying the image he could not erase. Emily's smile, the ease in her posture, the kiss that was not meant for him and yet struck him deeper than any rejection ever had. By morning, the truth he had tried to outrun settled heavily in his chest. He had crossed a line. At the office, Daniel arrived earlier than usual. He reviewed reports he had already memorized. He signed documents without reading them. When Emily stepped onto the floor, he felt it immediately. The space between them had changed. "Good morning, sir," she said, as professional as ever. "Good morning," he replied. The words felt unfamiliar in his mouth. Throughout the day, Daniel caught himself watching her. Not as an assistant, as a person. She worked with the same precision, the same quiet competence, but something else was different. She did not linger when he spoke. She did not shrink under his gaze. She did her job, and nothing more. At noon, he made a decision. "Miss Carter," he said, stepping out of his office. "Come in for a moment." She followed him inside, closing the door behind her. He waited for her to sit. She remained standing. "I wanted to discuss your workload," he began. "Yes, sir." The distance in her tone unsettled him. He cleared his throat. "You have been handling more than what is reasonable," he continued. "I will be reallocating some responsibilities." Emily looked at him, surprised, but her expression remained neutral. "That will not be necessary." He frowned. "It is." She hesitated, then spoke carefully. "With respect, sir, I have already made arrangements." "Arrangements for what?" he asked. She took a breath. "I have submitted my resignation." The words landed quietly, final, unavoidable. Daniel stared at her. "You are resigning?" "Yes," she said, "effective at the end of the week." For a moment, he forgot how to speak. "Why?" Emily met his eyes, not defiantly, not angrily, simply honestly. "Because I deserve to work in a place where respect is not conditional," she replied, "and I no longer believe this is that place." Silence filled the room. Daniel felt something fracture inside him. This was not a threat, not a negotiation. She was not asking for anything. She was leaving. "You are very capable," he said finally. "You have a future here." She nodded. "I know, just not like this." He wanted to explain, to justify, to tell her it had never been personal. But the words sounded hollow even in his own mind. "I am sorry," he said instead. It was the first time he had ever said it to her. Emily blinked, caught off guard. Then she nodded once. "Thank you for saying that." She turned to leave. "Emily," he said, stopping her. She paused, hand on the door. He wanted to say he had been wrong, that he had failed his own standards, that jealousy had exposed something ugly and true about himself. What came out was quieter. "I wish you the best," he said. She looked back at him, studying his face for a brief moment, then gave a small, sad smile. "I hope you find what you were looking for, sir." The door closed behind her. For the rest of the week, Daniel watched as Emily prepared to disappear from his world. Files were organized, instructions were written, transitions were smooth and efficient. She did not falter once, and every step she took away from him felt earned. On her last day, the office buzzed as usual. Meetings continued, phones rang, life went on. But for Daniel Hawthorne, something fundamental had shifted. Power had never felt so useless. And for the first time in his life, he understood what it meant to lose someone without ever having truly held them. Emily's last day passed without ceremony. There was no farewell speech, no gathering around her desk. Just polite nods, quiet goodbyes, and the steady rhythm of an office that moved on without pausing for one person. By 5 o'clock, her desk was empty, the chair pushed in, the nameplate removed. Daniel watched from his office as she stepped into the elevator one final time. The doors closed, and something inside him sank. That night, Daniel stayed late, long after the building had emptied. The silence felt heavier now. He walked past Emily's old desk, running his fingers along the smooth surface where she used to sit. For the first time, he noticed how small the space was, how little room she had ever been given. He returned to his office and opened a folder she had prepared before leaving. Inside were detailed notes, timelines, and instructions written with care. At the very bottom, a single line stood out. "I hope this helps whoever comes next." There was no bitterness in it, no accusation, just professionalism. Daniel closed the folder slowly. He had built his career on control, on precision, on the belief that people were interchangeable pieces in a system he mastered. But Emily had not been interchangeable, and now that she was gone, the absence was undeniable. The next morning, the office felt different. Her replacement struggled, deadlines slipped, small details were missed, questions piled up. Daniel found himself frustrated, not with incompetence but with comparison. Emily would have handled this. Emily would have known. By noon, he made a decision he could no longer delay. He called a meeting with senior management. "I want a full review of our internal culture," he said calmly. "Workload distribution, communication practices, accountability at the executive level." A few executives exchanged surprised glances. "This includes me," Daniel added. The room went silent. Over the following days, changes began quietly. Policies adjusted. Public reprimands were replaced with private conversations. Credit was given where it was due. For the first time, people saw Daniel Hawthorne listen without interrupting. But one person was not there to see it. Emily, meanwhile, was adjusting to a different rhythm of life. Her new job paid less, but the environment was lighter. She slept better. She laughed more easily. Mark met her after work sometimes, not with grand gestures, but with steady presence. No pressure, no tests. One evening, as they sat on a bench overlooking the river, Mark looked at her and said, "You seem different lately. Lighter." She smiled. "I feel like myself again." Back across the city, Daniel sat alone in his office, staring at his phone. He had not contacted her. He knew better than to cross that line. An apology meant nothing if it demanded forgiveness. Instead, he focused on actions. He reinstated projects Emily had quietly advocated for, but had never been approved. He reviewed past decisions with new eyes, recognizing patterns he had once ignored. The power he held now felt like a responsibility, not a shield. Weeks passed. One afternoon, Daniel attended a small industry networking event he would normally have skipped. As he scanned the room, a familiar voice caught his attention. He turned. Emily stood near the refreshment table, speaking with a colleague. She looked confident, unburdened. She did not see him at first. Daniel did not approach her. He simply watched, understanding now that redemption did not begin with reclaiming what was lost. It began with becoming someone worthy of standing beside it. And for the first time, he accepted a truth that had taken him far too long to learn. Love, respect, and trust were not earned through power. They were earned through restraint. And sometimes, the cost of learning that lesson was losing the very person who could have shown it to you sooner. The encounter at the networking event stayed with Daniel longer than he expected. He did not sleep that night, not because of regret this time, but because of clarity. Seeing Emily from a distance, confident and unburdened, confirmed what he had already begun to accept. She had not needed him to change in order to survive. She had needed him to change in order to stay. And he had failed her when it mattered most. The following weeks became a quiet turning point. Daniel stopped ruling by distance. He asked questions and waited for answers. He listened without preparing a response. When mistakes happened, he addressed them privately. When successes occurred, he named the people responsible, publicly, and without hesitation. The office noticed. So did the board. At a quarterly review, one of the senior partners leaned back in his chair and said, "You have shifted your leadership style." Daniel nodded. "I should have done it sooner." That was all he said. Meanwhile, Emily continued building a life that felt her own. She settled into her new role, one where her contributions were acknowledged and her voice welcomed. She no longer checked her email late at night with dread. She no longer rehearsed conversations in her head before speaking. Mark remained part of her life, steady and kind, but she found herself thinking less about comparison and more about alignment. She was no longer measuring herself against someone else's expectations. One afternoon, she received an unexpected message. It was an invitation to speak on a panel about workplace culture and ethical leadership. The event was sponsored by Daniel Hawthorne's firm. Emily hesitated. She had not spoken to Daniel since her resignation. Not once. The apology he had offered had been sincere, but it had not been followed by pressure or pursuit. That restraint mattered. After a long pause, she accepted. The day of the panel arrived quietly. Emily stood backstage, reviewing her notes, reminding herself why she had agreed. Not for him, for herself, for the version of her that had once stayed silent because she thought survival required obedience. From the front row, Daniel watched her take the stage. She spoke calmly, clearly, about the cost of silence, about the difference between resilience and endurance, about leadership that protected dignity instead of testing it. Daniel did not look away once. When the panel ended, applause filled the room. Emily stepped down, gathering her papers. She turned and found Daniel standing a few feet away. This time, he did not block her path. "Thank you for being here," he said. "You invited me," she replied evenly. "Yes," he said, "but you did not have to come." She studied his face. He looked different, not softer, just more present. "I came for the conversation," she said. "I understand," he replied. There was a pause. Not awkward, not tense, simply open. "I want you to know," Daniel said carefully, "that the changes you see are not temporary, and they are not about guilt. They are about accountability." Emily nodded. "That matters." "I am not asking for forgiveness," he continued, "and I am not asking you to return. I only wanted the chance to say this face to face." She waited. "I was wrong," he said, "and I am still learning how to be better than the man you left." Emily took that in. "Learning is a good place to start," she said. They stood there for a moment longer, neither reaching for more than what was offered. As Emily walked away, Daniel did not feel the familiar panic of loss. For the first time, he felt something steadier. Respect. And he understood now that whatever came next, if anything did at all, would not be built on power, regret, or control. It would have to be built on choice. And this time, the choice would not be his alone. Emily thought the panel would be the end of it, a clean closing point, a conversation completed, a chapter sealed without bitterness or return. For a few days afterward, life settled back into something steady. Work, evenings by the river, long conversations that did not feel like negotiations. And yet, something had shifted inside her, not toward Daniel, toward herself. She noticed it in small moments, when she spoke more directly in meetings, when she declined tasks that were not hers to carry, when she stopped apologizing for taking up space. The version of her that had survived Daniel's office no longer defined her. Mark noticed it too. "You seem distracted," he said one evening as they walked along the sidewalk near her apartment. "Not unhappy, just somewhere else." Emily slowed her steps. "I am trying to be honest with myself." He waited. He always did. "I spent a long time thinking endurance was the same as strength," she continued. "I am learning that it is not." Mark nodded. "And what does that mean for you?" She looked ahead, choosing her words carefully. "It means I do not want a life built on relief alone. I want one built on respect." He smiled, but there was a quiet understanding in his eyes. He did not reach for her hand. At the same time, Daniel faced a different reckoning. The internal changes he had implemented were no longer invisible. Complaints dropped. Retention improved. But accountability brought scrutiny as well. At a board meeting, a senior investor questioned his leadership shift. "Are these changes driven by emotion?" the man asked, "or strategy?" Daniel did not hesitate. "Both," he said, "and they should have been aligned from the beginning." The room went quiet. Later that week, Daniel made a decision that surprised even his closest advisors. He announced a restructuring of executive oversight, reducing his own unilateral authority. Transparency reports, independent reviews, shared accountability, power redistributed. The news spread quickly. Emily read about it online one morning, coffee growing cold in her hands. She reread the article twice, then closed her laptop. He was not performing remorse. He was paying for it. That realization unsettled her more than she expected. A few days later, an email arrived in her inbox. Short, direct, no pressure. Daniel was stepping back from a major public initiative and had recommended Emily as an external advisor. Not an employee, not a subordinate, a choice. She did not respond right away. That evening, she met Mark at the cafe where they had first talked. The same corner table, the same quiet comfort. "I need to tell you something," she said. He listened as she explained the invitation, the history, the complexity she had tried to simplify for weeks. When she finished, Mark took a breath. "I care about you," he said, "but I do not want to be the reason you avoid something meaningful, or the reason you walk toward it." Her eyes softened. "You always say the right thing." He smiled. "I say honest things." That night, Emily sat alone and wrote her reply. She accepted the advisory role, with boundaries, with conditions, with the clarity she had earned. When Daniel read her response, he felt something he had not allowed himself to feel before. Not hope, gratitude. They met weeks later in a neutral space. No office, no hierarchy, just two people across a table. "I am not here to rescue anything," Emily said calmly. "I am here because I believe systems can change." Daniel nodded. "So do I." There was no promise made, no history erased, only a shared understanding that whatever came next would be built slowly, visibly, and without shortcuts. And for both of them, that felt like the hardest test of all. One neither of them could fake, and one neither of them wanted to fail. The advisory work began quietly. No announcements, no press releases. Emily insisted on that. She arrived early on her first day, not to prove anything, but because she wanted time to think before the room filled with voices. The conference space was neutral, glass and light, deliberately separate from Daniel's office. When he entered, he did not take the head seat. That did not go unnoticed. They worked through difficult conversations, policy gaps, reporting failures, stories from employees that had once been buried under silence. Emily spoke clearly, without bitterness, without fear. She challenged assumptions. She asked questions that forced discomfort. Daniel listened. More than once, he felt the old instinct rise, the desire to control the outcome, to steer the room back into familiar territory. Each time he stopped himself. Each time he chose restraint. After one particularly tense session, an executive muttered, "This is going to cost us." Daniel replied evenly, "It already has. We are just acknowledging the bill." Emily met his eyes across the table. There was no triumph in her expression, only recognition. Weeks turned into months. The work was not easy. Progress rarely is, but it was visible. Processes changed. Complaints were addressed instead of redirected. People began to speak without rehearsing fear into their sentences. Emily maintained her boundaries. She did not stay late. She did not answer messages after hours. She did not soften her feedback to protect anyone's pride. Daniel did not ask her to. Outside of work, they remained careful. Conversations stayed professional. When they did speak alone, it was about systems, not feelings, accountability, not history. And yet, something quiet grew between them, not tension, trust. One evening, after a long review session, they found themselves alone in the building. The city lights reflected off the windows, the same view that once symbolized distance and power. "You could have walked away," Daniel said, breaking the silence. "No one would have blamed you." Emily nodded. "I know. Why did you not?" She thought for a moment. "Because I did not want my story to end with escape. I wanted it to include agency." He absorbed that. "I am glad you came back," he said. She looked at him then, really looked. Not as a boss, not as a man who once held power over her, as someone standing in front of her, changed by consequence. "I did not come back to you," she said gently. "I came back to the work." "I understand," he replied. And for the first time, he truly did. Later that week, Daniel made a public decision that surprised many. He stepped down from a visible leadership role tied to the very department where Emily had once worked. He appointed new oversight, independent leadership, no exceptions. When asked why, he answered simply, "Because trust cannot be demanded. It must be protected." Emily watched the announcement from home. She felt no rush of vindication, no relief, only a steady sense of closure beginning to form. Mark noticed it when she smiled at her phone. "You seem lighter again," he said. I am, she replied, not because something was fixed, but because something was faced. He nodded, understanding what she did not say. That night, Daniel sent a message he had rewritten 3 times before pressing send. Thank you for holding the line when I could not. Emily read it. She did not reply immediately. When she did, it was brief. Thank you for respecting it. There was no promise in those words, no romance implied, only acknowledgement. And for both of them, that was enough. Because the real transformation was not happening between them. It was happening within them. And for the first time, neither of them felt the need to rush what came next, whatever it might be. The advisory work concluded on a quiet Friday afternoon. There was no final meeting, no closing remarks, just a shared understanding that what needed to be done had been done. Emily packed her notes, shut her laptop, and looked around the room one last time. It no longer felt heavy. It felt resolved. Daniel walked her to the elevator, stopping a respectful distance away. This is where I say thank you, he said, and let you go. Emily smiled softly. That is exactly right. The doors closed, and for the first time, neither of them felt the sting of separation. Life moved forward. Emily accepted a permanent role at her new company, one that aligned with her values and trusted her voice. She built routines that left space for rest, for joy, for the quiet confidence she had earned. Mark remained part of her world, though gently, honestly. They spoke openly about what they wanted, about the pace that felt right. Daniel continued his work with less visibility and more purpose. He mentored quietly. He corrected privately. He listened more than he spoke. The firm stabilized, not because of his control, but because of the systems he had finally allowed to stand without him. Months later, they crossed paths again. It was not planned. A charity event, a modest venue, no spotlight. Emily arrived with colleagues. Daniel arrived alone. When they saw each other, there was no hesitation, no awkwardness, just recognition. They spoke easily, about work, about the city, about what had changed. You seem well, Daniel said. I am, Emily replied. So do you. There was a pause, comfortable and unforced. I owe you more than an apology, he said. But I know better now than to try to repay it with words. Emily nodded. You did the work, that is enough. They stood there, not as a boss and an assistant, not as a mistake and a lesson, but as 2 people who had grown because they had faced the truth. As the evening wound down, Daniel asked carefully, May I walk you out? She considered him for a moment, then smiled. Yes. Outside, the night air was cool. The city hummed around them, indifferent as ever. This is not about reclaiming anything, Daniel said as they stopped at the curb. I just wanted to ask honestly, without expectation, if you would like to have coffee sometime. As equals. Emily looked at him. She thought about who she had been, who she was now, and who stood in front of her. I would, she said. Slowly. He smiled. Slowly is good. They parted without promises, without urgency, without fear, and that was the difference. What began as power had ended in choice. What began as control had ended in respect. And what began as a mistake had become something neither of them rushed to name. Because the strongest love stories do not begin with grand gestures. They begin when 2 people finally learn how to stand on equal ground and choose each other from there.